Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the iRacing Camel GT series. This week we're at Spa. Here's a lap first. All right, lap time there is a 2:01.767. Now, I have done a prior lap guide for Spa, actually in the same weather as well for a couple of seasons ago, but I decided to go ahead and do another because the prior lap guide did not have a gear indicator, and I was actually asked in practice earlier today what gear was used for a certain corner of the track, and so I decided, well, let's go ahead and just do another guide, and I have adjusted the setup a bit. Still a mid downforce setup, and I've just made some tweaks that felt a little bit better for me, and I guess a couple of seasons of practice prompted me to make just a couple of tweaks there that I thought felt a little better. So this is default late afternoon weather that I used for this lap. And so I've got a 84 Fahrenheit track temp. We'll typically see weather, a lot of weather cooler than that as well. And I forgot to reset my optimals, but I think in this session it was a 201.5 optimal for my testing. And unfortunately, the splits here include cooler weather and even from a couple seasons ago. So I can't really show what that was optimal for this particular weather, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and go through this turn by turn in more detail. So let me just turn the audio down just a bit and go up to turn one. All right, so approaching turn one, La Source. The braking point is right around the 100, and you want a threshold brake right about that point. You can see I start to get on brake a little before it, and then there's the hard threshold brake right about where the 100 board is, and that's probably a little more than 80% actually there, but there is no lockup. You just want to be sure when you're braking in this car, when you're braking at high speed, that you're gradually coming off the brakes to avoid a lockup. So I'll come off brakes pretty quickly. And what you'll see me kind of doing as I approach the corner is kind of modulating off and on brake a little bit to get a feel for the speed of the car and how much I need to continually slow the car to get it at the right speed for this corner. This corner is vitally important. I think it's the most important corner on the track. And obviously it sets up before the longest wide open throttle straight on the track. You're going to be wide open throttle coming off of this corner all the way through Eau Rouge, down the Kemmel Straight, up to turn 7, 8, and 9, Les Combes. So you want to get a real nice exit to this corner. And to ensure that you do that, you want to make sure you don't overshoot it. So as you're braking and as you start to turn in, you want to start to be real light, just trailing off and maybe just barely lightly tapping on brakes at this point. If anything, and your goal should be to get on throttle just as you kind of come off the dip in the road. So just as I'm coming off, you can see I'm starting to ease back on throttle. But of course, throttle needs to be very light. There's still quite a bit of heavy turning going on down into first gear, and so really the main thing is that you're now shifting the balance of the car back, and you're kind of gradually rolling on throttle and making sure to be patient to get back to full throttle until you have straightened up the car. As you're straightening up the car, aim to use all of the curbing on the left to ensure that you can get straightened up sooner and back to full throttle sooner. You'll actually see a quick correction right there. And so you can kind of see where the limits of grip are as I'm only around 40-50% throttle, and it starts to come just a little loose on me there. So when I play back at speed, you'll notice it kind of comes a little loose there, and that delayed my throttle just a little bit. But otherwise, it was a pretty good exit off the corner there. So let's go ahead and play this back from the braking point. All right, so we're full throttle all the way down through Eau Rouge. I like to set up pretty close to the wall here on the right and aim to use all of the curbing, at least in the angle of the curbing here. So you'll see a kind of straddle straight across that. Really just trying to straighten out the road as best as possible. Just as I've immediately crossed the curbing here, I'm now kind of aiming to turn back and get as close to the curbing here to the right as I can. I don't like to touch it or use it. It will definitely unsettle the car too much, and you don't need to. The car gets through Eau Rouge really easily, and you just want to keep it nice and straight and smooth. I probably took a little too much curbing here. Finding the right line through here without unsettling the car. You can see it kind of bounces around a bit, and probably should have taken just a little less. I actually found that if you take just a little bit of this curbing, it also still unsettles the car. So it's almost like you kind of want to just be somewhere in between where I am and taking, where you can see where the black line here is. Maybe just aim to have a tire down the center of it. But it does unsettle the car just a little bit. I don't know how much speed that might cost, but really I'm just trying to straighten out the road here and keep the car as straight as possible to keep speed up. So let's play through Eau Rouge. And full throttle all the way down into Lacombe, 7, 8, and 9. Braking zone for me is actually just, I think the threshold is just past reaching the red and white curbing. I think I start to brake just as I reach it, but threshold will be after. So there'll be about should be about an 80% braking threshold at this point. So you can see where the car is there, where I'm threshold braking. I don't like to use too much of this curbing. I like to just kind of graze it or touch it lightly, just because I like the braking zone to be stable, and I don't like to getting the car unsettled under heavy braking, so I try not to use too much of that just for safety. So there's the threshold brake, and now easing off from there. Being a little bit patient on turn in. You don't want to reach the curbing too soon. Kind of treat it like a little bit of a later apex, so you can kind of see how you're coming across the latter part of the curbing just a little. So that right there is about the apex there. So you can see just past the first steeper part of the curbing there, and it is a little darker. And you want to make sure that you're setting up to come across the curbing here to the left, and you can even get up over it just a bit. You can see I come up over it, but don't take any more than that. That's about the limit there on what you want to take safely, and the cars can still come across here pretty smoothly, but you take any more than that and you can unsettle and send it into a spin in a hurry. And so that's actually fairly risky, the amount that was taken there. But I like to cut this a bit just to make sure that I can get set up for the following corner for turn 9, and you really want to, you're sacrificing your exit on this corner so that you can get back over to the curbing as quickly as you can. And I don't fully reach it. I don't come back all the way over to the curbing. There just isn't time to do so, but it helps set up and gives you a wider entry through turn 9. And again, you want to just come up and use some of the red curbing. Again, you can come up over and use the surface here past the red curbing, but it can get pretty bumpy, so it's just safer not to. If you can get a nice nice amount of speed through here, it's better to not use too much curbing when you can, just to keep the car settled. And then of course, as you're coming up onto this curbing here, this is pretty close to the off-track limit. As I'm coming up onto this red curbing, I'm just wanting to make sure I can get back to the road here prior to the curbing ending. As you clip just a little bit more than this, there is an off-track point right around here. And while the track limits were changed recently for this season, I did not find any points along the way where I could take advantage of any differences. In fact, all of the points where I typically have a risk of running off track were still the same for me. And so I didn't really notice anything that was really worth noting that would alter my line in any way or allow me to carry speed through any of the corners more than I would otherwise. And so I didn't find any differences as far as that goes. And the places that I almost always have to worry or be careful about off track were still the same. So anyway, that's just what I found. So let's play these corners through. Okay, so coming down into turn 10, Bruxelles, we want to threshold brake, again, just past the start of the red curbing. So you can see I'm already getting to brake just before it. And then the threshold brake is just past reaching. So there's should be about a 75% or so braking, I think. And again, I don't like to use too much of the curbing just to kind of keep from unsettling the car too much here in the braking zone. And I've kind of adjusted my approach a little to the way that I take this corner. I used to focus a little bit more on reaching the curbing here on the mid-corner point and kind of evening out my entry and my exit. But now I'm actually thinking much more about just taking a later apex and making sure that I can get the car as close to this curbing as possible, just past the midpoint, because this is now where you're going to be getting back on throttle is more of a later apex here. And so I think I got back to the throttle just lightly, just to kind of avoid overslowing the car right here. But really your main apex and throttle point is just past that mid-corner point. And this is where you want to be back to throttle and as close to this curbing as you can so that you can get to throttle soon. If you find yourself running too wide here, that'll delay your throttle. That'll delay how much speed you can now carry up into the following corner. So I'm kind of just focused on much more on a later apex. And in fact, if you look at where the car is at that throttle point, let's see here. Let's take a look at like a blimp view, maybe. That's I don't know if that's the best view there, but what about, let's see what chopper looks like. It's hard to really tell, but yeah, it's definitely past the midpoint where the later apex is. At least that's what I'm aiming for, and that's what I find works well for me. So let's go ahead and play that through. So another just quick note that I'm reminded of coming through that corner is that it is actually another point where there's a risk of spin. If you haven't slowed the car enough and you're still kind of tapping brakes at the mid-corner point and you're trying to continually slow the car, this point right here is just enough that if you're still lightly on brakes and you're trying to keep the car from running wide, too much braking will send the car into a spin here in a hurry. And so you just want to make sure you get your braking done early enough that you can now kind of modulate braking and throttle. You can see I'm actually tapping brake and throttle right here and just getting a feel for the speed there. But you don't want to be braking too much and slowing the car real late here, because it feels like it's a little bit off camber as you come around this apex, and you could slide in a hurry. So be careful of that. All right, so setting up for turn 11, you'll notice I come up onto the curbing here and the car gets unsettled a bit. So it's safer probably to avoid using too much of this curbing. It helps. It seems like it helps to get a little bit better of an entry to the corner here, but a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more risky to use it. So getting just close to that, it's definitely going to be a little bit safer. And I'm through second gear all the way through these corners, by the way, and just aiming to come up and use some of the curbing here. You can get, again, all the way up here into the surface just close to the dirt, but as you come down off of it, the car bounces enough that it can delay throttle. So it's just smoother and safer to not use too much more curbing than I've used there. So this way you can kind of ease back onto throttle. And I'll actually come up over this curbing into the green surface a bit. And this was, and I went back and looked at it, and it was a little further than I thought that I had gotten. And that may be a place where I was able to get away without an off track from before, but I don't think so. I think that is still kind of a safe zone even prior to the recent changes. It's really further up here where I would typically have trouble with an off track coming back to the surface there. So, but in any case, that's not an off track. So you can see you can kind of come up over into the that green. Green surface there just briefly without an off track. All right, so let's play that through. All right, so all the way up into fifth gear here, and again, just kind of very lightly using the curbing here. The braking point and downshift is, I guess, maybe about the midpoint. So you can see right at about this point, just past the opening here in the fencing. So there's the braking point. It's going to be a very light brake and then a very quick downshift into fourth. And as you come into this corner, you're going to kind of lift and then modulate throttle a little bit, but you want to avoid coming off throttle completely. You actually want to stay on throttle and avoid too much weight shift to the front, which can again send you into a spin here. So you want to avoid coming into this corner a little too hot, where if you're having to brake to avoid running wide, I'd actually suggest taking the off track. I mean, if it's in a race and if it's a track where, or if it's in a lap where you're not too concerned about getting a 1X, rather than trying to brake here from to avoid carrying too much speed, go ahead and just take the off track. Because if you find yourself coming in here too hot and you start braking here, the amount of speed you're carrying, again with a mid downforce setup that you have here, at least if you use the setup that I'm sharing, then you can very quickly spin. So you really want to be on throttle and just keep it on throttle. So your goal here as you reach the curbing here to the left should be just light throttle and kind of slowly easing on. And that helps keep the car balanced and keeping the car, the weight of the car shifted back a bit, help keep the car balanced. And as you reach the curbing, reaching about full throttle as you kind of come up over to the curbing here to the right. And I was a little late on where I like to be a little full throttle right about this point, so I was actually a little later on that. There's the full throttle point, and it'll be full throttle all the way through the rest of the corner from this point forward. But as far as the limits on the surface, just try to avoid coming up into the green area. There is a 1X little ways up past that curbing, so try to avoid running too much wider than that to avoid the off track. Okay, so coming down into turn 13, Just once again setting up along the left-hand side and getting ready to brake. I'm starting to brake prior to reaching the curbing. Threshold brake for me, I think, is right as I reach it. So you'll see right as I get alongside, there's about an 80% brake. That's my threshold, is right as I reach it. And again, being a little bit patient on turning. Here you want to take a little bit of a later apex to set up for turn 14 campus. So coming in a little late, using the latter part of the curbing here, just kind of modulating speed with throttle, about mid throttle here, and then again lifting on throttle and then turning in, and again kind of a later apex here. You want to just kind of get close to the curbing here. I could have used a little more, ran a little wide there. But the amount of throttle that you're applying here on the exit should be enough to prevent from running up and over the red curbing. So use all of the red and white curbing, but there is a 1x if you come up over that too much. All right, so let's play these through. So setting up for this corner, you want to get back to the left real quickly. So turn 15 here. So as you come off the curbing here to the right, you really want to just aim to get over here to the left right away, because you want to get the car left and then straightened out for the braking zone. My braking starts prior to the curbing. Threshold again is probably right as I reach the curbing, and it's probably more of a 60 to 70% braking, because you're not going to be reaching this corner with as much speed as some of the higher braking zone corners. So I'm not braking quite as hard here, but I am getting the car straightened up and as close to the curbing here on the left as I can to help open the corner up, and then turning in, and you can use some of the curbing here. You don't necessarily, I think the line that you're going to take through here doesn't necessarily need to use the curbing, because what I always aim to do is I'm coming across the apex here is to come way out wide and cross and put a tire over. So you'll see I'll put actually a tire over the red and white curbing into the green surface here. That way I can carry full throttle all the way through turn 16. And the only time I lift on throttle through turn 16 is to shift up. So, and of course you don't even have to do that. You can, if you like to just use clutch to shift up, you don't even have to lift throttle, but I like to lift on upshift. So that's just the technique that I use with this particular car. So you can do it either way, but not both. You don't need to both lift and clutch. It's just one or the other. So let's go ahead and play that through. So as you come up over the curbing here, just kind of think of straddling that a bit, get the car, the tire just barely over. Any more than that is an off track, but I like to use that as my line and getting the car settled and straightened out here, so that as I turn in, I can now, actually this is not a lap where I went full throttle. You can, if you hit this just right, you don't have to lift at all. And I actually did, because I felt like I needed to be a little bit safer with it, but you don't have to. If you hit it just right, if you hit it perfectly, you don't have to lift at all. So I actually did a little bit of lift, and that's actually worth talking about. Is that with race fuel and with hotter weather, you will need to lift briefly to avoid running wide on exit. So the amount of throttle that you apply here is really going to directly coincide with how wide you're going to run here on the exit. And so to ensure that you don't run over the red and white curbing here too much, this is the off track that you're in danger of hitting. That's the precaution I was taking there with my light throttle lifting there, to make sure that I didn't run wide on that exit. And you will have to do that with race fuel and depending on weather. But yeah, I thought this was a run where I went full throttle. I know that it's something that I've been trying to get better and better at doing, is hitting this full throttle without lifting, because this is also setting up for a very long straight wide open throttle area, and it is another good passing zone. So it's a good corner to master and set up for a pass if you can get a better exit off of this corner. All right, so let's go ahead and go forward here through 17 and 18. So the turn 18 here, I just focus on getting close to the white line here and then just straightening out the road. The car gets through here relatively easily, and I just kind of get close to the curbing and plan to use the exit curbing here a bit. And as long as you're getting off of the exit curbing, by the time it ends, you won't get a 1X, which can happen right over in this area. So that's pretty much it for that. And setting up for the chicane, turn 19 and 20. The braking zone's hard to see in this particular lighting in where the shadows are, but there's a couple bends in the wall. There's a bend here, and there's another bend here, really right where you can see kind of the light coming through the shadow there. That's actually where my braking zone is kind of in that second bend in the wall. But it is a little bit hard to spot. You can kind of see it as you're just kind of approaching at speed if you look for that. But that happens to be right at about where this light is shining through there. So that's my threshold brake there, and that's probably a little more than 80%. There is no lockup whatsoever. One of the things I did adjust from my last setup was I actually shifted the brake balance, the brake bias back a bit, and I think that further helped eliminate some lockups that I was seeing under hard braking. So I felt a little bit more confident with the heavy braking with where I had the brake bias set. So you can hear the tires there, and there's no lockup. There's just the spool of the turbo that you're hearing there. So as you're braking real hard there, starting to let off and easing off pretty quickly as you approach the first part of the chicane. And as you reach and as you're turning in, you really just kind of want to be off brake and no throttle yet, and just kind of let your speed carry you across the curbing. And you can see about how much of curbing is being used there. You can get away with more, but you do risk unsettling the car more if you take too much curbing there. So that's a pretty safe amount right there to kind of maybe come up about halfway. And then a little bit of throttle in between 19 and 20 here. Just kind of carry a little bit of speed, and also to shift the weight of the car back a bit. And then some maybe very light trail braking into just tapping lightly into the corner. Once again, using half or maybe a little more than half of the curbing here. And as you cross the second curbing, you can see starting to ease on throttle real gradually, and aim to use all of the curbing here to the right here on exit. However, I would be very cautious about reaching full throttle still right as you reach that curbing. I think it can be a little bit slippery as the car comes up on this curbing here. So make sure the car is straightened up and that you're not still turning as you reach this curbing. If you're turning just a bit and then hitting full throttle, it can slide on you a little bit there. So let's play that through. All right, so there's a lap of Spa. Hope you found it helpful. Talk to you later.